In my perspective, it was knowing that, almost 3 million folks had already fought since 1963 till that point, 1972, in Southeast Asia. 58,000 had died. A couple thousand at that point were still missing. It would be a dishonor for us to do less than our best. It would be an embarrassment to not be following the code of conduct to the best of our ability. Also, we had to hold our head up high every day in that there were guys that were there. I was a 72 shoot down toward the end. I was there just a little over a year. But some of you may remember the name Everett Alvarez, who was shot down, first guy in August of '64. So he was 8 years when I got there. And it would be a disservice to those guys also if we didn't follow in their footsteps, because they had really difficult times. So to get back to some other things, the day-to-day, for me, the first 75 days were the most difficult because that was when I was either in isolation or solitary confinement. And you really got a chance to understand your limits when you're severely challenged. You certainly understand all your strengths, which in my case were few, but you really see your weaknesses when you're put to the test. So you find out how flawed you really are, but you better learn from your weaknesses quickly because it may happen again tomorrow. So once again, we had that mission to protect. The biggest one during interrogations was name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and that's all we were supposed to give. And of course, that doesn't take very long. So being able to adapt to that environment, as dramatic as it was, as disruptive as it was, and still be able to survive and function. You were generally not at your best or your strongest because in many cases you had no medical attention, you had no food, you had no water, often no sleep. So it was challenging in interrogations when you had your wits about you. It was more difficult in that circumstance. So when you're really put to the test, which that was, or in your daily lives, it just could be a business test or a family test or whatever it happens to be, emotional or physical, you still have to find a way not just to survive, but you really have to figure out how to thrive and potentially excel. Living with guilt in terms of performance was really unacceptable, although we all carried it. Some people carried it for years because you never figured that you performed to the best of your ability. So that's the theme of resiliency a little bit. But what it really means is, if you take a hit, you got to recover quickly and move on. Some of these apply to business issues as well, as you'll find out. It's not just about being a POW or being in the military. A lot of it you carry on to a life lesson. You have to fight the urge to give up or to despair. It's really hard after a couple of years being up there to figure, is this war ever going to end, and get despondent and give up. So you have to fight that guilt. As I mentioned, you have to be ready to fight again when circumstances demand it. So overnight, you got to fall back and regroup and learn what worked and didn't work and be able to do it again the next day and the next day and the next day. And you could set the tone in some cases. This is more business than not, but especially with the current crisis going on, be ready to act versus react. It's really important that you set the agenda as best you can. Now, in an interrogation situation or in North Vietnam, we had virtually no rights at all. So it was really tough to set any tone. So what we really tried to do was resist the best of our ability, be as disruptive as you could, cause the North Vietnamese to bring as many guards in to watch us, which meant there were fewer North Vietnamese available to shoot at our soldiers. So it was a very interesting time. Before I turn it back over to Alex, a couple other points. The first thing you learned was communications, how essential that was absolutely to our survival and mental health. So really difficult to do when you're in solitary. But I remember I was there for about 35 or 40 days. And one day, all of a sudden, the slot on my door opens up and somebody throws a stick at me. And I thought that was kind of interesting, but I didn't know who did it. And I went and retrieved it. And after a while, because I was young and Italian, it took me a while to figure out what it was. And it was a message written in a small piece of paper inside this stick. So it was a drop. And basically what it said was, you're not alone. we'll keep communications with you. And then basically after that, just had 3 initials, GBU. And I tried for the longest time to figure out who GBU was, because I only knew a couple names of POWs, but it just stuck in my mind for a while. But the key thing was somebody took a risk to let me know that I was not alone. And so after that point, even though I was in solitary, I knew that I wasn't by myself. And guys were taking risks to communicate. So that was the lifeblood of the camp, was being able to communicate through whatever means necessary to ensure not just survival and mental health, but also helping with strategy and mission alignment and all the fancy terms you might be familiar with, just to be sure that we were all focused and on the same page. By the way, it took me several months later when I finally had a roommate to learn that GBU stood for God bless you. So my time in solitary was interesting. And what I offer you today is for all of us to kind of, in this time of crisis, reach out to your friends and neighbors. I have found out that at the age 72 that I am among the elderly now. So people are reaching out to me every day, whether it's family or friends. And I think that's good for people that are, even before this crisis, maybe were shut in. So keep that in mind. Communications is really key. Another one is when in doubt, act. Never do nothing. And in our case, it was, you could either sit on your thumb and wait in solitary confinement or probably be disruptive. And then when you had more friends or you had more roommates, as it turned out, the more roommates I had, the braver I got. Doing things that could rankle their feathers to be sure that we were being disruptive and caused more guards, it also really helped you from a motivational standpoint. Challenge all assumptions. One thing I will offer you, there's a really great book. This is more business, but Michael Hammer is a guy back in 1993 wrote a book called Re-Engineering the Corporation. And this came about right around when the dot-coms were getting started. And it really talked about businesses looking at themselves and re-engineering themselves, taking a look back and said, if I had to do it all over again, how might I approach this marketplace? But it also was interesting to me, even though it was 20 years after I got back, that when you're in business or small business or business ownership, sometimes you have to disrupt your marketplace. You have to stick back and look at what you're doing and see if there's a way of doing it better or smarter. Another point is set new limits for yourself. Don't be afraid to fail. That was an issue to me of the last one, which is taking some prudent risks at times in Hanoi. Not all the risks we took were prudent or smart, but then again, I was 23. So sometimes you do things outside the box. Communications was important because they told us, the older guys told us what worked and what didn't work, and what you should be careful of doing. If you're in total isolation, what you do doesn't have repercussions generally, but a friend named John Dramisi escaped, who was subsequently recaptured. But the repercussions of his escape, which he did on his own, was felt throughout the camp. So later on, as it turned out in 1972, there was another escape attempt planned, but it had to be organized and communicated across all the POWs and all the camps as best we could, because reprisals of that, if he got caught, or whether he got caught or not when it was found out, would ripple through the environment and cause punishment for all of us. So as long as we were all on the same page, we were prepared for that. So another comment would be prepared when this pandemic ends. The world and maybe marketplaces for your business folks will not be the same. So I suggest you use your time smartly now to strategize on options for yourself. Prepare to find a way to reshape your market, not wait for it to change. It's the old act versus react. Be prepared depending on what happens. If it's a slow recovery or a quick one, don't let it pass you by. You might have an opportunity that won't last long. So a couple of lessons learned for me was, took me a while to believe it, but you're generally stronger than you think you are. Oftentimes I surprised myself. I was disappointed in myself a lot, but I also surprised myself at other times. So when you are put to the test, I think sometimes you find out, well, I know that you generally find out what you're made of. So things like, how well did you adapt? How well did you recover? How well can you do? What can you do better the next day? Were all kind of lessons learned. It caused you to maintain focus. at all times, especially if you knew you were not on your A game, either because of starvation or physical injury or whatever. It's hard to keep your shit together. So the thing was, make a conscious decision all the time and try to follow through on that mission. I mentioned about taking prudent risks. And the other one is find ways to lead. A lot of that, in my case, I was so junior that I was just taking orders, but find ways to distinguish yourself. Find a way to stand out and do something where you have value. So in my case, it was communications because I was kind of small and skinny. It was easier for people to put me up on their shoulders and communicate out a window, things like that. So we all had to find a role that we were good at. Test yourself, find your limits, understand what they are, then start pushing the limits and move forward. Weakness is a terrible thing. It's very debilitating. Guilt is debilitating. You have to be able to break through those things to overcome your adversity. For those coming back from deployments, it's really tough to relieve yourself of some of the guilt in some of the situations. PTSD is very debilitating at times. But I learned as a POW, we didn't get diagnosed with that when we got back because it really wasn't a very common thing. But I think what happened was we so distracted our American military when we got back that we were in better shape than they thought. That mental health wasn't really challenged unless you were seriously ill. Managing time is really important. Obviously in the business world, of course, we know time is finite. I always liked working smarter as opposed to working longer or working harder. I just tried to behave very differently than my colleagues, which was I kind of focused on client and customer facing things during the day. And I used my off hours, my early hours in the day or after work to do email and simple things like that, not to distract from the finite amount of time that I had to do real work. And then finally, even in the POW situation, by the way, there was a show on Smithsonian just the other night called The Spy in the Hanoi Hilton. It runs a couple of times a year. You may be able to see it online. It's only 1 hour. Remarkable story about Jim Stockdale, who was one of our senior guys, Medal of Honor recipient. But basically how he spied for the American government through notes and messages and contraband and things like that. But a lot of it was, a lot of it happened when I was there in 1972. We just didn't know about it. But the point there is, build a plan. He obviously had a plan, have options, exercise, discipline, self-discipline. And the key is be prepared to execute quickly, make a decision. Stockdale had a difficult decision to make in 72, which was a plan to escape. Select number of people to escape and get picked up by some Navy submarines off the coast. But he had to make a decision and execute that quickly. He decided not to do it because he was fearful of the repercussions. But that's one thing about leadership is not just planning, but also being able to execute. So that's kind of my pre-planned remarks. I will be glad to go into any depth that you want or anything that you're curious about. Alex may have a few questions, but I'll be glad to field them. Like I said, for me, it was developmental. I was there from February 72 to March of 73. So I arrived at 23 and I left at 25. I had the luxury of having the largest room that I was ever in, we had about 30 POWs in. And so I had 30 mentors from all branches of the service. It was really rewarding. It was something I would have never had otherwise. And that learning experience was really important. I didn't adjust well when I got back. My wife would tell you that. I thought I was normal. So when I talk to veterans today and talk about benefits, they all say that they're okay. And I might accept that they're okay, but they're not the same. And that was pretty much true of me. So, finding your flaws and trying to recover from them without help is impossible. And with help, you got a shot at it. So, we're all going to act or react on these things differently. Mine was built on that kind of foundation, which is, regardless of how bad a day you have, if they're not shooting at you, it's a good day. That was the part of balance and perspective that I think has kind of helped me along the way. So, Alex, I will turn it back over to you. If you have some questions or want to point me in a certain direction, I appreciate it.
Ralph, thanks. Yeah, I'm gonna start out. First of all, I appreciate sharing this. As always, your story, and then kind of for us to reflect back as well. And one of the things you spoke about, Ralph, was guilt. And you told me beforehand, ask any type of question possible. And if you can elaborate a little bit, what did you mean by guilt? Was it before or after during your service in Vietnam, or afterwards?
Well, the first day after being shot down was guilt over doing just a shitty job. I mean, they didn't train us to be shot down. They didn't train us to lose a multi-million-dollar asset. They didn't train us to be captured. And then after that, it's, of course, did you do your best during any interrogation? Now, in 1972, with some exceptions, they weren't as interested in military intelligence as they were about finding your susceptibility to propaganda. So if you gave them any indication that you wanted to make an anti-war statement, or that you were just susceptible to having a dialogue, then they would play on that. So the thing at the end of a interrogation, or what we called a quiz, was, did you do your best? What could you have done better? And if you just felt like that they had the upper hand at times, you'd have to carry that guilt with you. And if you were in solitary, which I was, you had nobody to talk to or see if you could learn some techniques. So once you had some roommates, then it got, like I said, you get braver and you get smarter, and that helped a little bit. But guilt was a big issue. You also had the issue of family to deal with, which was to let them down. The one good thing we had going for us was we knew our families were okay. The guilt we had was we knew we put them in a situation where they didn't know if we were okay. It was bad enough being in a combat zone, but now we're prisoners of war. And even though there were 591 of us that left the Hanoi area, many of those, at times I think it might have been almost half, were still listed as missing in action. So those families really had no idea what the state was of their loved ones. So guilt really is a big issue for me, because it carries, it just carries on for much too long. And then the same thing for folks coming back from deployments today or out of the combat zone, coming home and trying to resolve issues that they've been carrying on, day after day or month after month, and then coming back and either not asking for or not getting proper treatment only increases the debilitation of that. So I just find guilt to be a really one issue that is a hard one to overcome.
Ralph, I appreciate that and sharing that, and I think it resonates with a lot of people on here, from their personal experience. One of the things you spoke about, Ralph, was routine, and then also figuring out what consistency means and predictability. So when you're in a very uncertain environment, day-to-day things change. And when you look at the simple stuff, which is for us relative to what you went through, give us some advice and feedback of how you were able to make kind of a routine, or bring consistency and uncertainty when you were in a POW.
Yeah, in solitary, you had to be careful. It was just boredom. So you had to keep physical agility and mental agility going at the same time, because you couldn't allow your body and your mind or your spirit to debilitate, because at any day you could be taken out for another interrogation, and you had to be on your A game again. But it got down to a point where after a while it was just very routine. I mean, a good day was boredom. A good day was just being left alone. Once you had a roommate or several roommates, things got a lot better, because now you had somebody to talk to. And let's get back to the communications again. And then as more people got shot down that were junior to you, or that weren't there as long as you, you had a mission now of making sure they knew that there were people around to help them, and giving them the best guidance that you could, to be sure that they could perform admirably as well. So routine, predictability. I mean, some things were the same every day, but the uncertainty of hearing those keys jangle and the gate, the cell block being unlocked and being yanked out for an interrogation, or somebody else being removed and never seen again, it was something you had to deal with. So predictability, it would have been nice to have a normal schedule. It got really tough in December of 72. For those that are old enough to know, the Christmas bombings of 72. So we were on the receiving ends of B-52s, and it was exhilarating. It was nervous because they came really close. So dozens of B-52s carrying 100 bombs each make a lot of noise. And we knew that was probably the only way we were making it home, which is bombing them into submission. So that broke up the routine. But it was a sense of encouragement that we had not been abandoned. One of the key messages we bought, me being the 1972 era POWs that we were able to deliver to the older guys there from 64 to 68, was the whole thing about the POW flag and the bracelet campaign. And that, for the first time, those guys realized that they had not been forgotten by the American public, because you got to remember, when they were shot down in the late 60s, it was all the anti-war activities were at their zenith. And for them that's the America that they remembered. That's the only one that they knew, and they thought that was the one they're going to come home to. So it was a great adrenaline rush for them to realize that they might actually be welcomed home. So there's a lot of little things there that deviate from the norm, and almost anything, a letter from home or a package from home, even though they would try to play one POW against the other and give, Joe next to me a letter, but not me, to kind of play us off on each other. Anything they could do to be disruptive with our minds, they tried that game. But I found it pretty remarkable, the resiliency of the American servicemen, especially the American flyers, based on our training and adaptability. I think it served us really well.
A question we have from the audience, Ralph, is, Ralph, still good with these questions. I want to be sensitive to talk about things, and I want to make sure that we're also learning a lot from all this in our situation right now. So I appreciate this. When reaching moments of despair, what was one particular event or moment that helped you find strength?
Prayer. I mentioned this old saying, "There's no atheist in foxholes." I'll tell you, it's true. Like you said, especially in solitary, you have to find ways to keep your mind active. And prayer was one thing that really helped a lot of people. When we finally had roommates in the Hanoi Hilton complex, an area called Camp Unity, I was with a bunch of guys that were shot down right after me in 72. We decided one Sunday we were going to have a church service, even though we knew in communicating with the other POWs that it was forbidden by the North Vietnamese. But it was important for us to disrupt. So we had a prayer service. Some of the older guys had more knowledge of prayers and hymns and everything else. And we did the Pledge of Allegiance and God Bless America. And of course, the guards came in and rattled the gates and rattled the cages and basically said, "No, you don't know how to do that." And, so after a few minutes, we had to stop. And in communicating with the other rooms in the Hilton, the guy said, "Look, we told you they were going to give you some crap for that." But next Sunday we did it again. And the only reason we kept doing it was important to us. I mean, there were a few things we could do to resist, and that was one of them. It come around about the third week when they started to come in with guns and yanking people out of the room and making examples of them, that we figured we pushed the limit about as far as we could go. But prayer was usually the one thing that kind of overrode everybody. When you're pretty much broken down, there's not a lot you can do if you don't have a roommate. And even if you do have a roommate, it's tough to give a morale boost to somebody that's just kind of physically beat down. So prayer was one that worked, but sometimes it was just in the 70s. We didn't call it an intervention, but that's pretty much what you had to do, was get everybody around and give somebody a pep talk.
So question from the audience. We have some others on here. What advice do you have for the younger generation? You know, I think it's one of the most difficult things we do have as veterans is we have our life experience in the military, some to one extreme to the other, experiences like yours, and some just, you know, regular service, which is great. But I think at the end, there's also a young generation out there that hasn't served yet. And, you know, when they deal with it, a difficult time like this, you know, what advice do you have for them of how they should view this and then how to think?
By today's standards, you know, we would call it, you know, mentorship. You know, we always used to joke about, you know, finding yourself a good godfather or a good rabbi, you know, somebody that would be a mentor to yourself. And you know, most people would find that an honorable thing to do for a younger person if they took advantage of it. Even today, after the entrepreneurship program we started at St. Joe's, you know, we had mentors come in and provide that guidance, and business leaders would tell us how important a mentor had been to them, you know, for 10 or 20 years, even when they were very senior positions in their own company. Taking advantage of a mentor really helped them with strategy and perspective and balance and priority setting and just feedback in general. So that's one thing, you know, I really would encourage most to do. If you're a veteran, sometimes it's really simple things. It's a couple people on the call that I know, Andrew and a few others that I know, is we just challenge every veteran, if we find out who they are, and make sure they're getting their veterans benefits. Are they in the VA health system? Are they are they getting disability? If they don't think they qualify, you ask them a few questions and you find out they probably do. So sometimes you have to prod them to get them along their way to ensure that they're getting treatment. Young guys, if you capture them coming right out of active duty, are probably still carrying some baggage, making sure they get help either within the VA or outside the VA. So there's a number of things we could do. It's really interesting times, I think, for young people to be getting started either in school or in business. The thing is, there are plenty of resources. The big challenge is finding those veterans and then helping them connect the dots. So whatever people, civilians or otherwise, that are coming in contact with young people in their neighborhoods or their family, is making sure you get them to a resource. And if you don't know a resource, Alex and a few other folks are involved in organizations in the greater Philadelphia area that certainly know companies and organizations that are ready and willing to help. So getting people help early on and not allowing conditions or circumstances to deteriorate, I think is in their best interest.
So question, Ralph, to go back, you know, questions again that are a little bit from your experience and also from an environment today. I think we're going to wrap up the questions at the end revolving around COVID-19. There's a bunch of questions that are kind of interconnected, so I'm going to bunch of them together. We have one person that wanted to know, was there any animosity between prisoners, and what were the things that you guys worked together during the captivity? And again, if this question was just asked by somebody, if you feel up for answering,
oh, sure. The largest room I was ever in had about 30 POWs in it. So just think about a group of 30 and decide if you ever get along with everybody else. The answer is no. They were all different branches of the service. They have all different kinds of behavior, different ranks. Even though the Vietnamese did not honor rank, we did. So, you know, the SRO of any room, senior ranking officer, was always in charge, regardless of branch of service. The thing about behavior as POW is that, you know, we had to follow the code of conduct. That was about the only constant we had, other than being military officers. And it was written pretty succinctly. The problem we had was some people chose to interpret it differently. So there's a section in there that says you'll make every attempt to escape. Well, John Dramisi, who I mentioned earlier, looked at that and said, I will make every attempt to escape. And he did. The challenge for the camp was if only everybody knew about it, they would have been ready for the repercussions, the lockdowns and the punishments and things like that. So everybody has perspective. Some look at it and say, name, rank, serial number, date of birth. That's all you're allowed to say. Anything after that, you're going to get, the shit beat out of you until you almost die. And some guys will say, well, how do I know if I'm almost going to die? How much punishment do you take? So some things were intentionally vague, and then some people were, very, very hard lines. So those kind of personalities exist everywhere, and somebody has to mitigate that a little bit. So if you have a strong leader in your room, that helped. If you didn't have one, you might have floundered a little bit, but conflict always existed. Usually you were on the same page relative to mission, which was being disruptive. But the hard thing was making sure that everybody, that you had the commitment of 100% of the people in the room. If you were going to do a church service and realize that any one of you can be brought out and be punished, even the guy that was leery about doing it had to be ready to be yanked out and be punished. So it's really tough with the kind of discipline and rigor of the military, and being that we were all military officers, it helped a little bit because we understood the impact. And as young guys who were there only about a year or less, knowing what the older guys had gone through, we could not afford to let them be disappointed in our performance. So that kind of helped always have you, focused in the right place.
So it sounded like you were even mentoring the ones that were just getting in. At the
Yeah,
same time, taking care of yourself while mentoring the
yeah, and I was in a cell block one time where I was the longest term POW, but the youngest. So, I was mentoring people that were very senior to me, but it wasn't really called mentorship. It was just kind of guidance and, what to expect next. What's the food going to be like? What's the punishment going to be like? So you had to be ready to fill a role regardless of what it was. And that's true today. Just because you're the youngest guy doesn't mean you don't have some skills to share.
Absolutely. No, that's very well said. So we're going to flip it over to today, Ralph, and you look at where everybody is. We're probably 3 to 4 weeks into a journey right now, right? So there's mindset, and then there's activities. So what would be some feedback, guidance on how we all should be thinking right now, as we still have some road ahead of us? What are some great tips you can provide us of mindset of how we can focus as we're still going to have some weeks with no end coming up?
There's only so many times you could reorganize your sock drawer. Only so many times the file cabinet. That was a nice thing about being in Hanoi, is we had no clothes. When they moved you from Camp A to Camp B, it took you about 5 seconds to load all your belongings together. And so that was pretty dramatic change, the uncertainty of what was going to happen next. But with the vaccine today, or the COVID issue today, COVID-19, I think that we're at the point now where people are kind of taking it seriously. All you got to do is watch the numbers growing. I don't think they're growing exponentially, but they are growing rapidly. As I mentioned earlier, communications is important. So if you know older guys or gals that maybe are by themselves a little bit, a phone call is an easy thing because you can't go visit them necessarily. Acting smart is good. I'm not good at that. I go out and walk or take a ride every day. I don't necessarily go anywhere, but I have to get out. I am not a good boredom guy. So I had that in my life in 1972. I know how I reacted there. I don't need that again. So I don't react well to that. But a lot of it too is especially for the younger folks on the call, is if you're still working, especially if you're on your own business and you plan on working again, use this time really wisely. You can be doing strategy sessions. You could bring together a small group. You could ask for some mentorship help. You could rewrite your resume, re-strategize instead of your plan, which is, I can't wait for things to get back to normal again. I am neither a psychiatrist or psychologist. My son is the psychiatrist. But I don't think anything's going to be the same again. It might kind of look the same, but we'll be lucky to ever get back to that. But the whole world could change. I mean, companies might decide they want to do more remote offices. I mean, they might want to change the way they do business. They might want to do more online work. Who knows what the hell's going to happen in education now that they're doing more. So I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen, but you better have a plan that says, this is my old job, but if it looks like this in the new world, I better be able to do student body right. And if it looks like this, I better be able to do student body left. Now's the time to be really thinking through that, so that when something opens up again and we're kind of allowed out of our houses, you could either wait and see what happens and then decide, or maybe you could take a chance and say, I'm going to force the behavior of my marketplace, and I'm going to see what happens if I do this, and act versus react. So it depends on where you are, what your marketplace is, what your job, but there's things that we could really do during this downtime that are prudent uses of your time. And then you do the sock drawer, toward the end of the day.
Yeah, Ralph, what you said there towards the end was really important when you said about rather than react is act. How do we think proactively in these situations for our own life and for business and family and everything else is we're tested more than today to think that way.
Yeah,
so Ralph, I got a question.
I spent a lot of years working with DuPont, and I only say this because they say it, or used to say it. Their corporate attitude was a lot different. For a company that was 200 years old, they admitted in many cases that their behavior was ready, aim, 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 aim. They were great analysts. They were great critical thinkers. They were great planners. They had great discipline. They didn't do a very good job of execution. So one thing when I taught, and then in business, and I taught in the business schools, was a lot of it was almost anything is better than doing nothing. And I think that was one of the problems was, it's keep delaying things because things are going to keep changing. Well, if you waited for things to stop changing, it's not going to be on this planet. So a lot of it was, you have good instincts, you've been well-trained, you have good experience, you have good gut instincts, do something, take a chance, and then move on, execute, and then be ready to act or react to that. So that to me is the best thing we could do.
Yeah, it's kind of always been in the military, right? To hurry up and wait. So it sounded like DuPont was a close second on that. It seemed like, for that area. So another question for you. Can you talk about the importance of having purpose? And could you talk of what you felt your purpose was in order to get through that time?
Yeah, I struggled with that in solitary, which was 75 days, because I was a young guy. I was a first lieutenant. I had a little bit of flight experience. I only had 90 days under my belt in combat. I had 69 combat missions. My experience on active duty was flight school and then POW. I mean, as it turned out, by the time I was in the military for 5 years, my longest tour was in Hanoi. So I didn't have a lot of experience. But give me the word you said again. I want to be sure I got the right tone.
Yeah, so you talk about purpose, the importance of having purpose, and talk about what you felt your purpose was. You said you struggled a little bit during that time of finding purpose.
At that point, all I knew was the code of conduct. I had no other external influences at that point from other POWs. So all I knew was what I knew, which was name, rank, serial number, date of birth, make every attempt to escape. If senior, you're in charge, which in a room of one, I was in charge of me. But I was never in charge again, because after then everybody outranked me. But my purpose really was very singular. It was to resist. And if I did a good job, I slept well at night. And if I didn't do a very good job, I didn't sleep very well at night. So in that case, I had a really narrow focus. It was very singularly focused for me by my circumstance. Once I had a roommate, then we could kind of share the burden a little bit. And then when I had 5 roommates and 25 and 30 roommates, it didn't because in my case, I kept moving down the totem pole. That didn't mean I wasn't challenged with something. So if you remember the old movies like The Great Escape and Hogan's Heroes and Stalag 17, I mean, everybody has a mission. It's just a matter of what it is. And sometimes your mission could be important. Sometimes it could be a distraction. It could be, student body right while Ralph goes left type thing. So Um, and usually those things came from the top. It didn't mean you didn't have an opinion. And that was the nice thing about that environment is it wasn't so overly structured that everybody didn't have a chance to provide input. And a good leader there would really help ensure that all alternatives were heard, but ultimately somebody had to make a decision. So the purpose in that environment was, understanding that that's pretty much what you had to do. The code of conduct was only 6 or 7 articles long. It didn't take a lot of time to do them. And the essentials are just that. Communicate with others and basically was just be on your best behavior every day. And if you had a chance to help one of your fellow POWs, which we did after the B-52 bombings, a lot of those B-52 guys were really seriously injured. We got a chance to help them a little bit. So sometimes your mission changes beyond what your skill level is. And you have to adapt to that too. I mean, if they were getting no treatment at all from the North Vietnamese, then even bad treatment from Ralph was better than nothing. So I think purpose is usually dictated by your environment. You just got to be ready to do something at the expense of repeating myself.
No, I appreciate that. So let's fast forward, Ralph. Couple probably last questions is you fast forward when you came back and you started your new life and got married or new job and all that, and you thrived as a civilian. What did you tell yourself during the transition and through the years about what success looks like for you? In a sense of work and family and all that. As we go through this and look at the end as well, and what are the things that you did and when you got out and throughout your life that kept keep reinforcing a positive attitude and sense of humor that you always have had?
To be honest with you, the first time home was really uncomfortable. We were really welcomed home, the POWs, but 3 million were not. And that was really uncomfortable to be singled out as, one of 600 that were welcomed home as opposed to millions that still couldn't wear their uniform in public. So if you're a little bit older, you might remember what it was like in the 60s and 70s, but you couldn't wear your uniform in public. You didn't put down you were a Vietnam vet on your resume. I mean, it was, to say that we were toxic was bad. I mean, I couldn't even join a VFW if I wanted to. So that's the guilt issue again. It kind of forced us to some extent to not tell anybody who we were because you got special treatment all the time. Readjusting back to family life is difficult, even though I was only gone a year and a half. My wife was 6 months pregnant when I got shot down. So when I left for Vietnam, and like I said, it was in that regard, it was tougher for them because of the uncertainty. They just didn't know how we were being held. But not getting treatment or the government not even knowing about PTSD and TBI and all those kinds of things like that. We had our physical health pretty well taken care of, but not our mental health. So a lot of us kind of struggled in silence. And a lot of it was just trying to find value and worth, especially after 8 years on back to duty, now going into the business world and having to restart again at like age 31. It was always like feeling like you had to prove yourself. So when I left active duty and I put my resume together, I never put down I was a POW. Just, I couldn't. Put down Vietnam vet, I put down everything else, but not that. Because I felt like I really had to earn something. And I'm carrying some baggage, so. But I really felt that if somebody brought it up, I would never deny it. I'd certainly talk about it. I just didn't want to lead with it. And then, just readjusting to family. And I think sometimes you keep having to feel like you want to prove yourself all the time at work. And you kind of work extra hard or extra long, or whatever it takes, because now you really have to readjust. And sometimes your family suffers for that because you're not spending enough time with them. So there's a lot of issues like that are really kind of unique to the POW experience. But in general, it was nice to at least know that we were welcomed home. But if you wore that uniform in public away from the military base, you were just another Vietnam vet. You're nothing special. So it was a really it wasn't until the Reagan era into the 80s before it started to get a little bit better, I think.
Ralph, I very much appreciate it. I want to thank you. We are on time right now at 6:30 right now, and I've hopefully answered a lot of the questions that come in through the chat box. I apologize to people if I haven't gone through it. I'm learning administratively as well of how to go through this and facilitate. And Ralph, you brought in some great experiences for us to really think back ourselves of learning from your experience of how we can overcome the minor challenges we're in today, and also put in our military experience, as you put it, right, and kind of how to view things and success for later. What last remarks would you have for us? Tips, anything else? When we're looking at the situation here, what can we do as veterans in our local community, or anything else? As we're hunkered home, we're mostly virtual. What is it that we can do to continue serving or providing other things to others? And you've alluded to a few about calling others, which is actually a really great action step. I think for everybody on this call is to continue calling people that are living alone. But what else is there?
I think the biggest challenge always is finding our veterans. So once we're allowed out again, and you have neighbors and friends and church groups and whatever you were involved with, social groups and soccer clubs, if you find somebody that's a veteran, especially a young veteran, find out who they are and insist they get some help. And if you don't know where to go, you call me, you call Alex, call any number of people, and we'll help you connect the dots. That to me is the single biggest thing, especially those who are a little bit troubled. We want to be sure they get mental health treatment for them, so this thing doesn't fester too long. If I could be of assistance to you folks, either to yourself or your small group or your company, let me know. I do some public speaking. If it's a nonprofit, I can't charge a nonprofit. If it's a regular business or a profit group, I charge them, but I give half of it to charity. So that's my way of giving back. But a lot of it is really just the single biggest thing we can do is find the veterans. I'm getting involved with a couple foundations. We're trying to help with suicide prevention and PTSD, and a little bit of work around helping with some college scholarships. So if you want to know more about that, you're free to contact me anytime. But my last 10 years has always been veteran focused, and the same challenge exists today as it did then, which is finding our veterans. So anything you could do to help with that would be greatly appreciated. And tonight, thanks Alex for allowing me to do this. This is, as always, 1 hour of therapy. I appreciate it a lot.
Well, Ralph, we have you to thank for your time to share with us. As always, it's always great to see you. And thank you for letting us know how to help. Just as a reminder for everybody, let us give back to Ralph. He's got some foundations he's working on. He's if he's looking to speak at different companies, so please look at your company or your other network. It's a great way for continuing to serve, is introduce Ralph to our business leaders so they can hear his message for their employees. We'll spread the word out, help inspire another generation of folks. So
and Alex is welcome to give out my cell phone and my email at any way you like. So I am easily accessible.
Absolutely. We will do this in a follow-up manner. We're going to send some information to everybody that registered how to get in touch with Ralph. We're going to have this pre-recorded. We're going to have this recorded as well to disseminate. And we're going to have future programs. So I want to thank everybody for coming in. We're going to have another speaker coming up soon in a week or so, a week or two. And then Ralph, thanks for setting things off. And then just as an admin reminder, we have a veteran town hall meeting on the 13th. Please stand by for details on social media under Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network. So if you haven't connected with us, please connect with us on all our social media. On April 13th, there will be a veteran town hall, which is a bunch of veteran organizations sharing what is going on today during the COVID-19 and a first information for everybody there. So Ralph, have a great evening. Thanks, my friend. And then thank you also for everybody attending. Especially I see you, Justin Constantine, coming in from New Jersey, New York, family of ours as well. So thanks, Justin, for joining us. And thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Hey, good night. Thanks all.